What defines a family? Is it blood, memory, or the stories we tell ourselves to sleep at night? For Rebecca Walsh, a 26-year-old bartender working double shifts to keep her younger brother in college, family meant sacrifice without question. For Harrison Blackwell, a real estate mogul whose signature graced billion-dollar deals, family meant legacy carved in marble and steel. They existed in different universes until a chance encounter at an upscale hotel bar revealed a connection neither could deny. But one Thursday evening, a single glimpse of a peculiar brooch would shatter both their carefully constructed worlds and expose a truth that powerful people had spent 3 decades trying to bury. The Crystal Lounge sat on the 42nd floor of the Regency Hotel, all polished brass and leather booths designed to make wealthy guests feel appropriately important. Rebecca moved behind the mahogany bar with practiced efficiency, mixing martinis and pouring 20-year scotch for people who wouldn't remember her face 5 minutes after leaving. At 11 p.m. on a Thursday, the crowd was thinning, just a handful of business travelers and a couple celebrating something in hushed, intimate tones. Rebecca's feet ached in her required heels. Her smile, though genuine by nature, felt painted on after 9 hours of service. She was calculating tips in her head, trying to figure out if she'd made enough to cover her brother Tommy's textbook bill, when the elevator doors opened with a soft chime. The man who stepped out commanded attention without trying. His suit was midnight blue, cut so precisely it seemed like a second skin. Silver cufflinks caught the light as he moved. He was perhaps 50, with steel-grey hair swept back from a face that could have been carved from granite. Everything about him screamed wealth, but it was the absolute certainty in his stride that truly set him apart. This was a man who had never been told no. The few remaining patrons instinctively straightened in their seats. Rebecca recognized the look. Power, real power, not the borrowed kind that came with a corporate credit card. He chose a seat at the far end of the bar, settling onto the leather stool with fluid grace. Rebecca approached, her professional mask firmly in place. "Good evening. What can I get for you?" The man's eyes, a striking shade of amber, met hers briefly. His gaze was assessing, dismissive, the look of someone categorizing her as part of the furniture. "Bourbon, neat, the Pappy Van Winkle if you have it." Of course, he'd ordered the most expensive bottle behind the bar. Rebecca nodded, coming right up. As she poured, her co-worker Jennifer leaned in close. "Do you know who that is?" "Should I?" "Harrison Blackwell. Blackwell Properties. They own like half the commercial real estate in the city. My cousin works in construction and says Blackwell's name on a project means paychecks that actually clear." Jennifer's voice dropped to a whisper. "They also say he's absolutely ruthless. Demolished a historic theater last year because the neighborhood association wouldn't approve his casino proposal fast enough." Rebecca glanced at the man. He was staring at his phone, his jaw set in a hard line. He looked less like a businessman and more like a general surveying a battlefield. She brought the bourbon over, setting it on a leather coaster. "Here you are, sir." As he reached for the glass, his sleeve pulled back slightly, revealing his wrist. But it wasn't his watch that caught Rebecca's attention. Pinned to the inside of his jacket lapel, barely visible, was a brooch. Her breath caught in her throat. It was distinctive, unusual. A silver eagle with outstretched wings, each feather meticulously detailed. But what made Rebecca's heart hammer against her ribs was the specific design. The eagle clutched a tiny emerald in its talons, and its eyes were 2 minuscule rubies that seemed to glow in the bar's low light. Rebecca knew that brooch. She had held an identical one in her hands countless times. It sat in a small wooden box on her mother's dresser, the single item from her mother's past that Catherine Walsh refused to discuss, refused to sell, refused to explain. The words escaped before Rebecca could stop them. "That brooch. Where did you get it?" Harrison Blackwell's hand froze halfway to his glass. Slowly, deliberately, he set it back down. When he looked up at her, the dismissiveness was gone, replaced by something sharp and dangerous. "I beg your pardon?" Rebecca felt Jennifer's warning stare burning into her back, but she couldn't stop now. The eagle brooch. On your lapel. My mother has one exactly like it. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Blackwell's expression hardened into something carved from ice. He reached up and touched the brooch, his movements careful, controlled. That's impossible. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. This brooch was commissioned by my grandfather in 1985. It's unique. There is no other. But there is. Rebecca heard the desperation creeping into her voice and hated it. I've seen it my entire life. The silver eagle, the emerald, the ruby eyes, everything. Blackwell leaned back, studying her with those amber eyes. The look wasn't kind. What's your name? Rebecca Walsh. Well, Miss Walsh, he pronounced her name like it was something distasteful. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but I suggest you stop. This brooch belonged to my father, given to him by his father. It represents 3 generations of the Blackwell family. The only way your mother has something similar is if she purchased a cheap imitation or, he paused, letting the implication hang in the air, acquired it through less legitimate means. The accusation hit Rebecca like a physical blow. A thief. He was calling her mother a thief. My mother is not a thief. Her voice shook with barely contained rage. She's the most honest person I know. Then she's mistaken. Or you are. Blackwell pulled out a leather wallet, extracting several crisp $100 bills and placing them on the bar. It was easily 5 times the cost of the bourbon. For your trouble and your discretion. He stood, adjusting his jacket, preparing to leave. The dismissal was complete, final. Rebecca's hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the bar. She's dying, Blackwell paused. My mother. She has stage 4 cancer. She's in hospice. Rebecca didn't know why she was telling him this, only that the injustice of his accusation, piled on top of watching her mother fade, ignited something fierce inside her. That brooch is her most precious possession. She's held on to it through bankruptcy, through my father's death, through everything. She told me it was proof. Proof that someone loved her once, before everything fell apart. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Blackwell's face. It was brief, barely perceptible, but Rebecca saw it. Proof of what? He asked, his voice losing some of its edge. She never said. Just that it mattered. That one day it might matter to me, too. The silence stretched between them, taut as a wire. The couple in the corner booth had stopped talking, sensing the tension. Blackwell reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, setting it on the bar next to the cash. Tomorrow, 2 p.m., my office at Blackwell Tower. Bring the brooch. We'll settle this. And if I prove you're wrong, something that might have been respect flickered in his eyes. Then I'll listen to what you have to say. He walked to the elevator without looking back. Rebecca stood at the bar, her heart racing, the business card heavy in her hand. She had just challenged one of the most powerful men in the city, and tomorrow she would have to face him with a truth neither of them was ready for. The drive to Mercy General Hospital took 20 minutes through empty streets. Rebecca's mind raced the entire way, replaying the encounter, trying to make sense of it. How could there be 2 identical brooches? Why had her mother kept it hidden, refusing to explain its significance? She found Catherine Walsh sleeping, her frail body barely making an impression under the thin hospital blanket. At 58, cancer had aged her mother into someone nearly unrecognizable. The vibrant woman who had raised Rebecca and Tommy with fierce love and laughter was disappearing, replaced by this fragile shell. Rebecca sat in the uncomfortable vinyl chair beside the bed, watching the steady rise and fall of her mother's chest. On the bedside table, among the pill bottles and water pitcher, sat Catherine's few personal belongings. Rebecca reached for the small wooden box, her hands shaking. Inside, nestled in faded blue velvet, was the brooch. Rebecca lifted it carefully, angling it toward the fluorescent light. The silver eagle gleamed. The emerald caught the light, throwing tiny green reflections on her palm. The ruby eyes seemed to stare back at her, holding secrets. "You're here late," Rebecca startled. Her mother's eyes were open, watching her with a clarity that had been absent for days. "Mom, I didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't." Catherine's voice was papery thin. Her gaze dropped to the brooch in Rebecca's hand. "You're looking at it. I need to ask you about it. About where it came from." Something shifted in Catherine's expression. Fear? Sadness? "Why now?" Rebecca told her about the encounter at the bar, about Harrison Blackwell and his identical brooch, about his accusation and his demand to see proof. As she spoke, she watched her mother's face drain of what little color it had. "Blackwell," Catherine whispered the name like a curse. "After all these years. Mom, what's going on?" "Who is he?" Catherine closed her eyes, and for a moment Rebecca thought she'd fallen asleep again. But then she spoke, her words measured and careful. "Your grandfather, my father, his name was Thomas Brennan. He was an architect, a brilliant one. In the early 80s, he worked for a large firm here in the city. He designed a mixed-use complex, residential and commercial, that would have revolutionized how people lived and worked downtown. It was his masterpiece." Rebecca had heard pieces of this story before, but never in detail. Her mother had always shut down conversations about her father, the grandfather Rebecca had never known. He pitched it to his firm. They were enthusiastic, but then something happened. The project was shelved. 6 months later, a nearly identical design was announced by a new developer in the city, a man named Richard Blackwell. Harrison's father. Yes. Catherine's grip on Rebecca's hand tightened. "My father tried to fight it. He had drawings, plans, proof that the design was his. But Richard Blackwell had something my father didn't. Money, power, lawyers who could bury evidence and bury people." "What happened?" 3 men came to our house one night. I was 14. They weren't violent. They didn't need to be. They laid out photographs on our kitchen table. Pictures of me at school, pictures of my mother shopping. They explained very calmly that Thomas Brennan could make noise about stolen designs, or Thomas Brennan could accept a generous consulting fee and sign away all rights to his work. They made it clear what would happen if he chose wrong. Rebecca felt sick. He signed. He had no choice. They paid him $75,000, which seemed like a fortune at the time. But it wasn't payment. It was silence money, and it destroyed him. Tears slid down Catherine's hollow cheeks. He died of a heart attack 2 years later. He was 46 years old, but really they killed him that night in our kitchen. They took his soul, and the brooch, Catherine's expression softened, became distant with memory. That came later. A few months after Dad died, a man came to see me. I was 16 by then. He said his name was Simon. He was probably in his 50s, well-dressed but worn down, like he'd been through his own wars. He said he'd heard what happened to my father. He said he understood, because the same family had done the same thing to him. Simon told me he'd worked with Richard Blackwell years before, that Richard had a pattern of stealing ideas, crushing anyone who stood in his way. He gave me the brooch. He said it was meant to symbolize freedom, the freedom to soar above the corruption. It had been given to him by someone he loved, someone the Blackwells had also destroyed. He told me to keep it, that one day it might prove the truth about that family. Mom, who was Simon? What was his last name? But Catherine was fading, her energy spent. I don't know. He never told me. He just said he was a ghost, someone who'd been erased. Keep the brooch safe, Rebecca. If Harrison Blackwell has one like it, then Simon was connected to that family in ways I never understood. Promise me you'll find out the truth. Her eyes closed, her breathing evening out into sleep. Rebecca sat in the silence, holding the brooch, feeling the weight of a story that stretched back decades, connecting lives that should never have intersected. Tomorrow she would face Harrison Blackwell, and tomorrow, one way or another, the truth would begin to surface. Across the city, Harrison Blackwell stood in his penthouse apartment, a sprawling space of floor-to-ceiling windows and minimalist furniture that felt more like a museum than a home. He held a glass of bourbon but hadn't taken a sip. The encounter with the bartender had shaken him in ways he couldn't quite articulate. Her certainty, her anger, the mention of proof, and most troubling of all, the genuine grief in her eyes when she spoke of her dying mother. He walked to his study, a dark wood-paneled room that smelled of leather and old books. From a locked drawer in his desk, He retrieved a black velvet box. Inside was his brooch, identical to the one he'd worn that evening. His father had given it to him on his 30th birthday. "This represents the Blackwell legacy," Richard had said, pinning it to Harrison's lapel. "We rise above the ordinary. We take what we deserve. Never forget who you are." Harrison had worn it ever since, a private reminder of his family's power. But now, looking at it, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: doubt. He opened his laptop and typed a name into the private database his company maintained. Rebecca Walsh. The search returned basic information. Age 26, bartender at the Regency Hotel, no criminal record, financially struggling. Her mother, Catherine Walsh, née Brennan, currently in hospice care at Mercy General. Brennan. The name tugged at something in his memory. Harrison opened another program, accessing the archived files of his father's business dealings. He searched for Brennan and found a single hit: a consulting agreement from 1984, signed by Thomas Brennan, architect. Payment $75,000. Terms: complete assignment of intellectual property rights related to urban development project, later known as Blackwell Plaza. Blackwell Plaza, the complex that had launched his father into the top tier of developers, the foundation upon which the family fortune had grown exponentially. Harrison had always been told his father designed it, that it was Richard Blackwell's vision made real. But consulting agreements suggested otherwise, and the amount, $75,000, was far too small for a project that generated hundreds of millions in revenue. Harrison felt a cold dread settling in his stomach. He picked up his phone and called his attorney, Marcus Webb, not caring that it was nearly midnight. "Marcus, I need you to pull everything we have on the Blackwell Plaza development. Original plans, contracts, everything from 1983 to 1985. Harrison, it's midnight." "Can this wait?" "No, and I need something else. Find out everything you can about a man named Thomas Brennan. Architect, died around 1986. I want to know who he was and what his connection was to my father." There was a pause. "Are you sure you want to dig into this?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Marcus had been the family's attorney for 30 years. If there were secrets, Marcus knew them. "Yes, I'm meeting with his daughter tomorrow. She claims her mother has a brooch identical to mine. I want to know how that's possible." Another pause. Longer this time. "Harrison, there are some things in your family's history that are better left buried. Then unbury them. I want the truth." He hung up and returned to the window, looking out over the city his family had shaped. For the first time in his carefully controlled life, Harrison Blackwell felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. The truth, he was beginning to realize, was a dangerous thing. And once you started searching for it, there was no turning back. Blackwell Tower rose 70 stories into the sky, all glass and steel and architectural arrogance. Rebecca stood on the sidewalk at 1:55 p.m., clutching her mother's wooden box, feeling utterly out of place. She'd chosen her most professional outfit, a navy dress she usually reserved for job interviews, but even that felt inadequate. The people streaming in and out of the building wore power like a second skin. Expensive suits, designer bags, the kind of confidence that came from never having to check a bank balance before making a purchase. Rebecca took a deep breath and pushed through the revolving doors. The lobby was all marble and chrome, with a security desk that looked more appropriate for a military installation than an office building. "I have an appointment with Mr. Blackwell," she told the guard, showing him the business card. He checked his computer, made a call, then handed her a visitor badge. 70th floor. Elevators on your right. The ride up was silent, except for the soft jazz playing through hidden speakers. Rebecca watched the numbers climb, her stomach twisting with each passing floor. What was she doing here? What did she hope to accomplish? The elevator opened directly into a reception area that screamed wealth. A woman in her 30s, impossibly polished, looked up from a sleek desk. "Miss Walsh?" "Yes. Mr. Blackwell is expecting you. This way." She led Rebecca down a hallway lined with abstract art that probably cost more than Rebecca would make in a lifetime. They stopped at a set of double doors. "He's inside." Rebecca entered and found herself in an office that took up a significant corner of the building. Two walls were entirely glass, offering a view of the city that made her dizzy. Harrison Blackwell stood by the window, his back to her, hands clasped behind him. "Miss Walsh, thank you for coming." He turned to face her. In the daylight, he looked older, more tired. "Please sit." Rebecca sat in one of the leather chairs facing his desk, setting the wooden box on her lap. Blackwell sat behind his desk, the massive piece of furniture putting a physical barrier between them. "You brought it." "I said I would." Rebecca opened the box, lifting out the brooch. She placed it on the desk between them. Blackwell stared at it for a long moment. Then he opened his own desk drawer and removed an identical black velvet box. He opened it, revealing his brooch, and placed it next to hers. The silence in the room was absolute. The two brooches sat side by side, perfect twins. The same silver eagle, the same emerald, the same ruby eyes. "They're identical," Blackwell said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes." He picked up both brooches, examining them closely, comparing every detail. When he looked up at Rebecca, his expression had changed. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something that looked like fear. "I had my attorney do research last night. Your grandfather, Thomas Brennan, designed Blackwell Plaza. My father paid him $75,000 for the rights. It was legally acquired. After your father's men threatened his family," Blackwell's jaw tightened. "Do you have proof of that?" "My mother's testimony. She was there. That's not proof. That's a story told by a woman who might have misunderstood what happened." Rebecca felt anger flaring. She didn't misunderstand men showing her pictures of herself and making it clear what would happen if her father didn't cooperate. "Why didn't your grandfather go to the police?" "Because men like your father don't face consequences from the police. You know that as well as I do." Blackwell was silent. He set the brooches down, his hands flat on the desk. "I received a call this morning from Marcus Webb, my attorney. He asked me if I really wanted to know the truth about my family's history. He implied there were things best left alone. And what did you say?" "I told him I wanted to know everything." Blackwell met her eyes. "My father gave me this brooch on my 30th birthday. He said it represented the Blackwell legacy. But he never told me where it came from, who made it, or why. I always assumed it was custom-made for our family. My mother said a man named Simon gave her the brooch. He said it was given to him by someone he loved, someone your family destroyed. He said it represented freedom. Simon," Blackwell repeated the name slowly. "Did your mother know his last name?" "No, he said he was a ghost. Someone who'd been erased." Blackwell's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then stood abruptly. "Marcus is here, with documents." He walked to the door, opening it. The man who entered was in his 60s, carrying a leather briefcase that looked like it had traveled through decades. Marcus Webb had the bearing of someone who'd spent his life cleaning up other people's messes. "Harrison." He nodded, then saw Rebecca. "Miss Walsh, I presume." "Marcus found something." Blackwell's voice was tight. Marcus set his briefcase on the desk and opened it, pulling out several files. "I went through the archives. Not the official ones, but the ones your father kept in his private safe. The ones he made me promise to destroy when he died. You didn't destroy them. No, a lawyer's first duty is to the truth, even when clients don't want to hear it." Marcus opened the first file. In 1984, Richard Blackwell paid Thomas Brennan $75,000 for architectural designs. But that's not the whole story. There are letters in here, correspondence between your father and his head of security, a man named Frank Morrison. He pulled out photocopies of letters, the paper yellowed with age. Morrison was ex-military, specializing in what they called influence operations. Your father used him to persuade people who stood in the way of business deals. Rebecca felt sick as Marcus laid out document after document. Photographs of the Brennan family, surveillance reports, and finally, a typed memo that made Blackwell's face go white. "Subject Brennan has been neutralized. Design acquired. He understands the consequences of discussing this matter publicly." My God, Blackwell sat down heavily. "There's more." Marcus pulled out another file. "The brooches. I found the commission receipt. They were made in 1982 by a jeweler named Anton Rousseau. Your father ordered 2 identical pieces. The receipt has a note. One for RB, one for SB. SB, Rebecca whispered. Simon, Marcus nodded. Simon Blackwell, Richard's younger brother. The room spun. Rebecca gripped the arms of her chair. Harrison's uncle. Richard and Simon were partners in the early days, Marcus continued, his voice heavy. Simon was the creative one, the idealist. Richard was the businessman. They built Blackwell Properties together, but they had fundamentally different values. Simon wanted to create beautiful, functional spaces that served communities. Richard wanted profit, no matter the cost. What happened? Blackwell demanded. They had a falling out in 1983. Simon discovered that Richard was using intimidation and theft to acquire projects. He threatened to go public to expose the truth. So Richard did to Simon what he later did to Thomas Brennan. He bought him out, forced him to sign a non-disclosure agreement, and erased him from the company's history. Marcus pulled out one final document, a formal agreement, dated April 1983. Simon Blackwell agreed to sell his 50% stake in Blackwell Properties for $2 million, to never use the Blackwell name professionally, and to never discuss the company's business practices. His signature was shaky, defeated. Simon took the money and disappeared, Marcus said. But he kept the brooch, and apparently he gave it to Catherine Brennan when he learned what Richard had done to her father. A symbol that she wasn't alone, that there were others who'd been destroyed by the same family. Harrison sat in silence, staring at the documents spread across his desk. His entire understanding of his family, his legacy, his own identity was crumbling. My father was a monster. His voice was hollow. Your father was ambitious, Marcus corrected gently, and ruthless. He built an empire, Harrison. But he built it on the broken backs of good people. Rebecca found her voice. Where is Simon now? Marcus's expression became somber. He died in 1995, liver failure. He'd spent his last years drinking himself to death in a small apartment on the edge of the city, alone, forgotten. The weight of it all settled over the room like a shroud. 2 families destroyed by one man's greed, a brother erased from history, an architect silenced by threats, and 2 brooches meant to represent freedom and partnership, instead bearing witness to betrayal. Harrison stood and walked to the window, his back to them. When he spoke, his voice was raw. What do I do with this? Rebecca stood as well, clutching her mother's brooch. You acknowledge it. You stop pretending the Blackwell legacy is clean. You make it right. How? Your grandfather is dead. Simon is dead. My father is dead. How do I make any of this right? My mother is still alive. Rebecca's voice shook with emotion. She's dying, but she's alive, and she deserves to hear the truth. She deserves to know that her father wasn't weak, that he was brave, that he protected his family the only way he could. Harrison turned to face her. In his eyes, Rebecca saw something she hadn't expected. Not anger or pride, but genuine anguish. Will you bring her here tomorrow? I'll tell her myself. Rebecca nodded, tears streaming down her face. Yes, but as she turned to leave, Marcus cleared his throat. There's one more thing you should both know. He pulled out a final document. I found this in Richard's safe. It's a letter addressed to Harrison, meant to be opened after Richard's death. I never received a letter, Harrison said, because I never gave it to you. I read it and decided it would do more harm than good. But now, given everything that's come out, you need to see it. He handed the envelope to Harrison. It was sealed, yellowed with age. Harrison opened it with shaking hands and began to read. As his eyes moved down the page, his expression shifted from confusion to horror. What does it say? Rebecca asked. Harrison's voice was barely audible. It's a confession. My father knew he was dying. He wrote this 2 weeks before his heart attack. He read aloud, his voice breaking. Harrison, if you're reading this, I'm gone. There are things you need to know about how this company was built. Things I'm not proud of. I stole ideas. I threatened good people. I destroyed my own brother because he threatened to expose me. The worst was Thomas Brennan. He had a daughter, Catherine. She was just a child when I ruined her father's life. I tried to find her years later to make amends, but she'd disappeared. If you ever meet her, tell her I'm sorry. Tell her that her father was a better man than I ever was. The guilt has eaten at me for decades. I built an empire, but I destroyed my soul. Don't make my mistakes, son. Be better than I was." The letter fluttered from Harrison's hands. He stood there trembling, tears streaming down his face. His father had known, had felt guilt, but had lacked the courage to make things right while alive. Rebecca didn't know what to do. She stood frozen, watching this powerful man crumble under the weight of inherited sin. "I'm sorry," Harrison finally said, looking at her, "for what my family did to yours, for what my father did. I'm so deeply sorry." Rebecca felt the anger that had sustained her begin to dissolve. She saw now not her enemy, but a man trapped by a legacy he never asked for, discovering that everything he'd built his identity on was founded on cruelty. "It's not your fault," she said quietly. "You didn't know, but I do now, and I have to decide what to do with that knowledge." Marcus gathered his documents. "I'll leave you two to talk. But Harrison, a word of advice. The truth is out now. You can't put it back in the box. The only question is what you build with it." He left, closing the door behind him. Harrison and Rebecca stood in the silence, two strangers connected by brooches and broken families. "Tomorrow," Harrison said finally, "I'll come to the hospital. I'll tell your mother everything. And then, if she'll allow it, I'd like to make amends. Real amends, not hush money. A foundation in your grandfather's name, funding for young architects, something that honors what he tried to create." "She would like that," Rebecca said. "He would like that." Harrison picked up both brooches, holding them in his palm. These were meant to represent partnership, a better way of doing business. Maybe it's not too late to honor that vision. He held out Rebecca's brooch. As she took it, their hands touched briefly, and Rebecca felt something shift. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the possibility of it, the first tentative step toward healing. The next morning, Harrison Blackwell entered Mercy General Hospital for the first time in his life. He'd been in boardrooms and on construction sites, in penthouse apartments and exclusive clubs, but never in a place like this. The smell of disinfectant, the beeping of monitors, the hushed conversations of families facing the worst moments of their lives. Rebecca met him in the lobby, her eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep. "She's having a good day. Alert. I told her you were coming. How did she react?" "She said it was about time." They rode the elevator in silence. Harrison clutched the folder Marcus had prepared, containing copies of his father's letter, the surveillance photos, the confession. Proof. Evidence that Catherine Brennan's story was true. Rebecca led him to a small room at the end of a quiet hallway. Through the door's window, Harrison could see a frail woman sitting up in bed, oxygen tubes running to her nose. She was looking out the window at a small courtyard garden. "Mom," Rebecca entered first. "He's here." Catherine turned her head. When her eyes met Harrison's, he saw a flash of recognition that went deeper than knowing his name. She was seeing his father in him, seeing the face of the man who'd destroyed her family. Harrison entered slowly, feeling like an intruder. "Mrs. Walsh, thank you for seeing me." "Brennan," she corrected, her voice thin but firm. "I kept my maiden name. I never let him take that from me." "Mrs. Brennan," Harrison corrected. "I came to tell you the truth. About what my father did to your father. About Simon. About all of it." For the next hour, Harrison laid it all out. He showed her the documents, read her his father's letter, explained how Simon had given her the brooch as a symbol of solidarity. Catherine listened in silence, tears streaming down her face. When he finished, she reached out a trembling hand. "Let me see your brooch." Harrison removed it from his lapel and placed it in her palm next to her own. She stared at them, these twin symbols of a dream destroyed and a family torn apart. "My father used to tell me," she said quietly, "that good things took time to grow, but bad things could destroy them in an instant. Your father, Harrison, was that bad thing. He destroyed good men, but you're not him. I'm his son. I've benefited from everything he stole. Yes, but you came here. You brought the truth." She closed her hand around both brooches. "That took courage. The same courage your Uncle Simon had. The same courage my father had when he signed those papers to protect us. She held the brooches out to Harrison. I want you to take mine. Keep them together. Let them represent what they were always meant to represent. Not division, but partnership. Promise me you'll build something good with the knowledge you have now. Something that honors all the people your father hurt. Harrison's vision blurred with tears. I promise. And promise me you'll look after Rebecca and Tommy. They're all I have. They're good kids, and they deserve better than the hand they've been dealt. I promise, Harrison repeated, his voice breaking. Catherine smiled, a peaceful expression that softened her worn features. Then I can rest. The truth is out. The promise has been kept. She looked at Rebecca. Baby girl, I'm so proud of you. Rebecca collapsed into the chair beside the bed, taking her mother's hand. Harrison backed away, giving them privacy, but Catherine called out to him. Harrison, one more thing. Yes, ma'am. Thank you for being brave enough to face this. Your Uncle Simon would be proud of the man you're becoming. Those words, that benediction from a woman his family had wronged, broke something inside Harrison Blackwell. He left the room and stood in the hallway, his back against the wall, sobbing for the first time since he was a child. Catherine Brennan died 3 days later peacefully, with Rebecca and Tommy at her side. Her last words were about the garden outside her window and how the eagle had finally learned to fly. The funeral was small, just family and close friends. But Harrison Blackwell attended, standing at the back of the church, paying his respects to a woman whose strength had finally brought truth to light. After the service, he approached Rebecca. I've set up a meeting with my board next week. I'm announcing the creation of the Thomas Brennan Foundation for Architectural Excellence. Full funding, independent oversight. It will support young architects who might otherwise be crushed by larger firms. People like your grandfather. Rebecca nodded, wiping her eyes. She would have loved that. There's something else. Harrison pulled an envelope from his jacket. Your mother's medical bills. They're paid. All of them. And I've set up trust funds for you and Tommy, for college, for whatever you need. It's not charity, Rebecca. It's restitution. It's what should have been done 30 years ago. Rebecca stared at the envelope, overwhelmed. I don't know what to say. Say you'll help me. With the foundation. You knew your grandfather through your mother's stories. You understand what he stood for. I need someone who can keep me honest, who can make sure we're actually helping people and not just performing charity for good press. I'm a bartender, Harrison. I don't know anything about running a foundation. You knew enough to stand up to me in that bar. You knew enough to fight for the truth when it would have been easier to walk away. That's exactly the kind of person I need. Rebecca looked at Tommy, who was standing nearby, young and heartbroken. She thought about her mother's final words. The eagle had learned to fly. Okay, she said. I'll help you, but I have conditions. Name them. The foundation has to be independent. Really independent. If I see you trying to control it, use it for PR, or silence people the way your father did, I walk. And I make sure everyone knows why. Harrison extended his hand. Deal. They shook, and in that moment something shifted. Not friendship, not yet. But partnership. The kind of partnership the two brooches were always meant to represent. 3 months later, Rebecca stood in a sleek conference room on the 45th floor of Blackwell Tower. She wore a professional suit that Harrison had insisted the foundation pay for, her hair pulled back, her expression confident. She was presenting the foundation's first round of grant recipients to the board. 20 young architects from underprivileged backgrounds, each receiving full funding for their education and mentorship from established professionals. Among them was a young woman from Rebecca's own neighborhood who'd been designing buildings in notebooks since she was 10, but could never afford architecture school. As Rebecca finished her presentation, the board members nodded approvingly. But Rebecca noticed one man in the corner, Harrison's cousin Edward, watching her with barely concealed contempt. Edward Blackwell had been vocal in his opposition to the foundation from the start. He saw it as a waste of company resources, a sentimental gesture that accomplished nothing. More than that, he saw Rebecca as an interloper, a threat to the Blackwell legacy. After the meeting, As board members filed out, Edward approached Rebecca. That was quite the performance. His tone was pleasant, but his eyes were cold. Tell me, Miss Walsh, what makes you qualified to oversee millions of dollars in charitable giving? The fact that I understand what it's like to struggle. Rebecca met his gaze steadily. Something you've never had to do. Edward smiled, a predator's smile. You're sleeping with him, aren't you? Harrison. That's the real reason you're here. Rebecca felt rage surge through her, but she kept her voice calm. If you ever say that again, I'll sue you for slander. And I'll win. Big words for a bartender playing dress-up. This bartender exposed your family's corruption. Don't forget that. Edward leaned in close. You think you've won. You think bringing up ancient history and guilting Harrison into throwing money around makes you a hero. But you're nothing. You're a gold digger who saw an opportunity and took it. And eventually Harrison will see that too. He walked away, leaving Rebecca shaking with anger. She'd known there would be resistance, but Edward's venom caught her off guard. Harrison found her a few minutes later, still standing in the empty conference room. He took one look at her face and frowned. Edward said something. It doesn't matter. It does to me. What did he say? Rebecca told him. Harrison's expression darkened. I'll handle him. No, Rebecca said firmly. I need to handle this myself. If I run to you every time someone challenges me, they'll never take me seriously. He called you a gold digger. I know what I am and what I'm not. His opinion doesn't change that. Rebecca picked up her presentation materials. But I do need to know something. Why are you really doing this? The foundation bringing me in all of it. Is it guilt, penance, or do you actually believe we can make a difference? Harrison was quiet for a long moment. When my father died, I felt relief. Not grief, not sadness, but relief that I'd never have to face his disappointment again. I built this company into something even bigger than he did, thinking that would prove I was better than him. But I wasn't better. I was just more efficient at the same ruthless game. He walked to the window, looking out at the city. Meeting you, learning the truth, it broke something open in me. For the first time, I saw what my family's success actually cost. And I realized I had a choice. I could keep playing the game, keep building the empire, or I could try to build something different, something that actually mattered. He turned back to her. I'm doing this because I want to be able to look at myself in the mirror and not see my father. And I need you because you're the only person who'll tell me the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. Rebecca felt her anger at Edward dissolve. Okay, then let's make this work. Over the following months, the foundation flourished. Young architects were mentored, scholarships were awarded, and projects that would have died for lack of funding came to life. Rebecca worked tirelessly, putting in 14-hour days, learning about non-profit management, building relationships with universities and architecture firms. Tommy graduated college with honors and was immediately hired by a prestigious firm, impressed by his connection to the Brennan Foundation. He called Rebecca in tears the day he got the offer. Mom would be so proud, but success bred enemies. Edward Blackwell watched from the sidelines, his resentment growing. He began spreading rumors among the board, questioning Rebecca's credentials, suggesting financial improprieties, planting seeds of doubt about Harrison's judgment. One evening, Harrison called Rebecca into his office. His expression was grim. We have a problem. Edward's been talking to board members. He's calling for an audit of the foundation. Let him audit us. Our books are clean. It's not about the books. It's about perception. He's building a narrative that you're manipulating me, that the foundation is a vanity project, that we're wasting company resources. Rebecca felt cold dread. What do you want me to do? You fight back. We're calling a special board meeting next week. You and I will present a full accounting of the foundation's activities and impact. We'll show them exactly what we've accomplished. The week leading up to the meeting was a blur of preparation. Rebecca and Harrison compiled statistics, testimonials, and financial reports. They rehearsed their presentation until they could deliver it in their sleep. But the night before the meeting, Rebecca received a call from Marcus Webb. Rebecca, we need to talk. In person. Now. She met him at an all-night diner far from Blackwell Tower. Marcus looked grave. "Edward has something? I don't know what it is, but he's confident. Too confident. He's planning something for tomorrow's meeting. What could he possibly have? We've been completely transparent." Marcus hesitated. "What do you know about your mother's father?" "Your great-grandfather?" Rebecca frowned. "Not much. My mom rarely talked about him. Why?" "Because Edward's been digging. And according to my sources, he found something. Something about the Brennan family history that he thinks will discredit you and the foundation." Rebecca's stomach dropped. "What did he find?" I don't know yet. But whatever it is, it's bad enough that Edward's already celebrating. You need to be prepared." The board meeting the next morning was tense from the start. Edward sat at the far end of the table, a satisfied smile on his face. Harrison and Rebecca presented their findings. 23 architects funded, 12 projects completed, measurable impact on underserved communities. The board members seemed impressed. But when Rebecca finished, Edward stood up. That was very moving, very heartfelt. "But before we vote on the foundation's future, I think the board deserves to know the full truth about Miss Walsh's background." Harrison stiffened. "Edward, what are you doing?" "We'll be providing context." Edward opened a folder. "Miss Walsh has positioned herself as the daughter and granddaughter of victims. The Brennan family destroyed by the evil Blackwells. It's a compelling narrative. Unfortunately, it's not the whole story." He pulled out a document and projected it on the screen. It was a newspaper article from 1958. "This is a story about James Brennan, Rebecca's great-grandfather. Turns out he was arrested for embezzlement. He stole $50,000 from his employer, a shipping company, and fled town. He was eventually caught and served 5 years in prison." The room fell silent. Rebecca stared at the article, her mind reeling. Edward continued, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "So the Brennan family's history of financial struggle, it didn't start with Richard Blackwell. It started with a criminal grandfather. And knowing this, we have to ask, is Rebecca Walsh really a victim, or is she continuing her family's tradition of taking what doesn't belong to her?" Rebecca felt the world tilt. She looked at Harrison, saw the shock in his eyes. This changed everything. If her great-grandfather was a thief, it poisoned the entire narrative of victimhood. "That's enough, Edward." Harrison's voice was sharp. "Is it?" "Because I think the board deserves to know who they're trusting with millions of dollars." Rebecca found her voice. "My great-grandfather's actions have nothing to do with me or the foundation, don't they? Your family has a history of financial desperation and questionable ethics. How do we know you're not using Harrison's guilt to enrich yourself? Because every cent of the foundation's money is accounted for. Because I work for a modest salary. Because everything we've done has been transparent and ethical. So you say. But with your family history, can we really trust you?" Rebecca felt tears of rage and humiliation burning her eyes. Edward had found the perfect weapon. Not a lie, but a truth twisted just enough to destroy her credibility. Harrison stood. "This meeting is over. We'll reconvene when everyone has had time to review the facts objectively." But Rebecca knew the damage was done. As board members filed out, she could see the doubt in their eyes. The foundation she'd built, the work she'd poured her heart into, was crumbling. In Harrison's office afterward, she broke down. He won. Edward found the perfect ammunition. He found a piece of history that's irrelevant to your work. It doesn't matter if it's relevant. It matters that it's there. My great-grandfather was a criminal, Harrison. That makes me vulnerable. That makes the foundation vulnerable." Harrison paced, his mind working. "There has to be more to the story. People don't embezzle $50,000 without reason." "Not in 1958, Rebecca looked up. "What are you saying?" I'm saying we dig deeper. We find out what really happened to James Brennan. If Edward can use your family's history against you, maybe your family's history can defend you." They spent the next 2 days researching, calling archives, pulling records. And slowly, a different story emerged. James Brennan had worked for Whitmore Shipping, a company that was, it turned out, owned by a holding corporation. A holding corporation that traced back to Alaric Pierce, Harrison's great-grandfather. Marcus found the key document, a letter from Alaric Pierce to the Whitmore shipping manager, dated 1958. It instructed the manager to handle the Brennan situation and secure the asset. The asset turned out to be a revolutionary cargo loading system James Brennan had designed. Alaric wanted it. James refused to sell. So Alaric had done what he did best. He'd had James framed for embezzlement. The $50,000 hadn't been stolen. It had been payment for the loading system, paid to James and then retroactively declared theft when James refused to sign over the patent rights. James Brennan had gone to prison for refusing to be robbed. The pattern was clear, spanning 3 generations. Alaric Pierce had destroyed James Brennan. Richard Pierce had destroyed Thomas Brennan. And now Edward was trying to destroy Rebecca, using the very crimes his family had committed. Armed with this evidence, Harrison called another board meeting. This time, Rebecca and Harrison came prepared not just to defend, but to attack. Harrison stood before the board, his voice cold and controlled. The Duchess Justaris Justita Sale. Edward accused Rebecca of continuing a family tradition of theft. He was right about the tradition. He was just wrong about which family. He laid out the evidence methodically. The letter from Alaric, the patent filing by Whitmore Shipping for James Brennan's loading system. The timeline showing James's arrest came exactly 1 week after he refused to sell his invention. 3 generations, Harrison said, his voice heavy. 3 generations of Brennans destroyed by 3 generations of Pierces. My great-grandfather framed Rebecca's great-grandfather. My father threatened Rebecca's grandfather. And now my cousin is trying to destroy Rebecca using the very crimes our family committed. He turned to Edward. You wanted to expose the truth about the Brennan family. Congratulations, you've exposed the truth about ours. Edward's face went white. You can't prove any of that. I can prove all of it. Marcus has the documents ready for the DA if you'd like to continue this conversation. The threat hung in the air. Edward was cornered, and he knew it. This family has spent a century building wealth on the backs of good people, Harrison continued. The Brennan Foundation isn't charity. It's restitution. It's what should have been done in 1958, in 1984. In every year we've profited from theft and intimidation. And Rebecca Walsh isn't here because I'm sentimental. She's here because she represents everything this family destroyed and everything we need to become. He looked around the table. So you have a choice. Support the foundation and begin the process of making things right, or side with Edward and continue the tradition of corruption. But if you choose the latter, I'll resign and take the foundation with me. I'll fund it privately, and I'll make sure everyone knows why. The room was silent. Then one by one, board members began nodding. Even those who doubted Rebecca could see the truth now. The Brennan family hadn't been criminals. They'd been victims of a systematic, multi-generational campaign of theft. Edward stood abruptly and walked out without a word. He resigned from the company the next day, taking a settlement and disappearing from public life. In the aftermath, Rebecca stood on the rooftop terrace of Blackwell Tower, looking out over the city. Harrison joined her, 2 brooches in his hand. Your mother was right, he said, handing her one of the brooches. The eagle learned to fly. 3 generations of Brennans couldn't get justice. But you did. Rebecca pinned the brooch to her jacket. Not just me. We did, together. Partners, Harrison said, pinning his own brooch on. Partners, Rebecca agreed. The Thomas Brennan Foundation continued to grow, becoming a model for ethical philanthropy. Young architects from disadvantaged backgrounds found support, mentorship, and opportunities they'd never dreamed possible. Tommy Brennan became an award-winning architect, designing affordable housing that was both beautiful and functional. His first major project was a community center in the neighborhood where he and Rebecca grew up. Above the entrance, he installed a sculpture, a silver eagle with outstretched wings, its eyes gleaming with emerald and ruby. Harrison Blackwell transformed his company, implementing strict ethical guidelines and transparency measures. He donated half his personal wealth to various foundations, keeping only enough to live comfortably. The Blackwell name, once synonymous with ruthlessness, became associated with integrity. And Rebecca Walsh, the bartender who dared to challenge a billionaire, became one of the most respected voices in non-profit leadership. She never forgot where she came from, never lost sight of why she was doing the work. 5 years after that first encounter in the Crystal Lounge, Rebecca stood at a podium, addressing a crowd of young people who'd received Brennan Foundation scholarships. She wore both brooches now, one on each lapel. Harrison had insisted she keep his, saying it belonged with its twin. "My mother told me that good things take time to grow, but bad things can destroy them in an instant," Rebecca said. "For 3 generations, my family experienced that destruction. But she also taught me that truth, once revealed, has a power that no amount of money can suppress." She looked out at the faces before her, young and hopeful and hungry for a chance to build something meaningful. "You're here because someone tried to destroy your dreams before you could even dream them. Someone told you that you didn't belong, that you weren't good enough, that you should accept less. But you're also here because you refused to accept that narrative. You fought for your place. And now you have the tools to build something extraordinary." She touched the brooches. "These represent a promise that was broken and then kept, a partnership that was destroyed and then restored. They remind me every day that it's never too late to do the right thing. That legacy isn't just what we inherit, but what we choose to create." After the speech, as the crowd dispersed, Harrison approached her. He was smiling, something he did more often these days. "Your mother would be proud. So would your Uncle Simon, and my grandfather, and my great-grandfather. All of them. Do you ever regret it? That night in the bar when you could have just kept quiet?" Rebecca thought about her mother's face when she'd learned the truth. About Tommy's graduation. About the hundreds of young people whose lives had been changed by the foundation. About Harrison, transformed from a cold tycoon into a man who'd learned what truly mattered. Not for a second. They stood together, looking out at the city their families had shaped in both terrible and beautiful ways. The past couldn't be changed. The crimes couldn't be undone. But the future was theirs to build, and they would build it together, guided by the promise of 2 silver eagles learning finally to fly. This is a story about the long shadow of injustice and the courage it takes to bring truth to light. 3 generations of the Brennan family suffered because of one family's greed, but it took a bartender with nothing to lose and a billionaire willing to face uncomfortable truths to break the cycle. What would you have done in Rebecca's place? Would you have stayed silent to protect yourself, or would you have fought for the truth, no matter the cost? And if you were Harrison, could you have faced the reality that everything you'd built was founded on corruption? If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear that truth still matters, that justice is worth fighting for, and that it's never too late to make things right. Subscribe for more stories that remind us why integrity matters and how one person's courage can change everything.